Today, ladies and gentlemen, I want to continue on our quest of highlighting some of the exciting information that was revealed to us at Polkadot Decoded 2024, which is now concluded. A lot of the talks are now coming online, and we've been looking at some of the interesting things that were revealed in the revelations that were the talks that were given. Now, we've looked at a talk from Bjorn Wagner, who is the CEO of Parity Technology, where he introduced things like Polkadot Pay and the kind of Polkadot app that is set to kind of really catapult Polkadot into that lead position in regards to user friendliness and onboarding as it relates to the Web3 space. And actually, yesterday we coupled what was looked at with what Nova Wallet revealed in regards to what they're doing. So you're now going to be able to use Polkadot to pay for everyday goods and items. And of course, there's a MasterCard integration there. And of course, all the vendors that use MasterCard. So very, very exciting things coming out. We've only covered really 2 talks at this point. And one talk that I want to cover, or try my best to cover, I should say, was Gavin Wood's talk. Now, Gavin Wood's somebody who I've followed really for as long as I've been in the cryptocurrency space. We're going to be talking about kind of identity. Now, not in the form of kind of a human identity, so who you are, what you are, all of that kind of stuff. More, how do you identify a human being in a world where human beings have been taken out and we see things like smart contracts and kind of self-executing computer-on-computer systems. That was what the first sort of part of his talk was all about, which we're going to be covering and sort of why this is important. Then we're going to be looking at the solution. The interesting thing and a concept that I think Gavin Wood is putting forwards is if you're a user of Polkadot and you want to be a citizen through being a user of Polkadot, perhaps you should be able to use it for free. So Ethereum is at a real kind of stalemate in the sense that, and I'm somebody that's paid a lot of money to the Ethereum network, too much to want to think about. Ethereum's at a stalemate in the sense that if you want to use Ethereum, if you want to partake and be a part of that blockchain, it's exceptionally expensive to do that. And yes, there are layer 2s, but they introduce all these other problems that we see taking place. They introduce a kind of element of vulnerability. With Polkadot, that it kind of parachains you can almost look at as a layer 2 equivalent, perhaps. We'll talk a little bit more about this in Jam, but Polkadot kind of has this built-in in a native way that's, I think, a far better model. It's what originally stood out to me. But the first part of the talk really is Gavin Wood talking about kind of how do you know that a human being, a unique human being is interacting within this kind of world. And if we have unique individual citizens of Polkadot, surely they should be able to use the chain for free. But in order to allow people to use the chain for free, to a degree, so for kind of what he's calling reasonable usage, so just to use, maybe you want to take out a loan or you want to send coins from one place to another, why should we have to pay for this? It's truly, I think, fascinating what his talk was about, but quite hard to understand on a high level. Why should people have to pay for this? But the problem is, if you're going to give that to people for free, so I want to send you some money, should we have to pay for that? Potentially not. If we're going to give this away for free, how do we ensure that we're giving it away to free and only one person is getting their kind of free usage and people don't arbitrage it like they absolutely would do? Just like with airdrops, for example, if you could identify that there's a kind of unique person without actually revealing the identity, giving them almost like a pseudonym, then things like airdrops wouldn't be arbitraged and all the problems that arise from that and all this kind of a stuff. This is a very interesting concept, and certainly we're talking about some perhaps more rudimentary uses for this, but certainly when you talk about the rise of AI, it's of extreme importance. And certainly even in regards to DeFi, you can almost build up a reputation through a mechanism that might be coming to Polkadot, in the sense that if you don't pay a loan back, people aren't going to give you a loan. So it incentivizes good behavior on kind of DeFi protocols or things like this, without it being a credit score, which is ultimately going to be used to restrain and control you. So without further ado, let's introduce the first clip that we have for you, which is Gavin Wood actually talking about kind of individualism, more so than identity. Identity, not the right word. He's very careful to say this isn't an identity. This is a way to identify individualism, and that there's a human interacting here rather than computer on computer. And this is a problem because we end up in this very iRobot-y world when we just have computers running computers. There needs to be something, and this is why distributed ledgers really are at the heart of the technological advancements that are going on. So let's play clip number uno.
So first, I want to make it super clear that I'm not talking about identity. Identity is one thing. It's an important thing in many sort of respects, but this is not about working out who a particular endpoint is in the real world, whatever. It's rather being able to tell the difference, essentially, between a device and a device currently being operated by a human. Now, there's a sort of additional bit onto that, which is that if it's currently being operated by a human, can we give that human some sort of pseudonym so that we can recognize in this specific context if that human uses the device to interact with us at a later stage. And this has become an ever important part of these kinds of digital systems, decentralized Web3 digital systems, as we have, systems in general, as we have moved from being humans that largely interact with each other, as we were when I was born, right? In the 80s, this is what you did. You just interacted with each other. In the 90s, we started interacting with services via phones. Yeah, this was like a big deal. We had like telephone banking. And this, for us, this kind of meant that we started interacting with systems that were not fronted by humans, because the telephone banking things, although initially they were just call centers with tons of humans, and we were kind of interacting with a human over the telephone line, these eventually mutated into automated voice systems that we have these days. With the advent of the internet, of course, it became ever more divorced, and we sort of ceased interacting when we with humans for many services, day-to-day services. And of course, with like Web 2, commerce, and so forth, it's ever more in that direction. Web 3 really just cements it, right? In Web 3, you never interact with a human. The whole point of Web 3 is that you can interact with a machine. Indeed, machines can interact with machines. So what's the point? Well, it's a foundational element of any real society. It's at the heart of many of our social systems. Commerce, everything to do with kind of governance, polling, voting, opinion, consolidation. Justice is based heavily on the ability to be Sybil resistant. Community building. Many elements of things that we take for granted from enterprise are actually based on Sybil-resistant assumptions. Fair and reasonable usage. Noise limitation and general community management is also based on Sybil resistance. There's a lot of stuff that's based on knowing whether something is a human. Community building, airdrops, right? Recognition and distribution of individuals within communities, very difficult. Airdrops are incredibly broadly speaking, incredibly inefficient in terms of the capital expenditure. Because the whole point of an airdrop is that you want to give as much to as many as possible. And the way of doing that efficiently is to identify individuals and then give the same amount to each one. But if all you have is like wallet balances, you're kind of stuck. And the distribution curve ends up being very hockey stick-like. And you end up not incentivizing most of the people very much at all. Fair and reasonable use. I mean, it's less of an issue now because if you use too much internet, they basically just throttle you, slow you down. You still get to use, you still have some internet. But back in the old days, 10, 15 years ago, if you use too much internet, they would decide, oh, actually, you're probably just not using it fairly. It's not a reasonable use of this unlimited internet. And so they would basically stop you altogether. There wasn't quite as much possibility to just slow you down. Nonetheless, it allowed internet providers to provide near unlimited internet for almost everyone by being able to distinguish between who the users were 95% of people's usage could be covered under a flat rate contract. Freemium models, the bedrock of Web 2, are also heavily based on the ability to desybil. It used to be the case that you didn't really need to desybil, like rewind, I don't know, 20 years. These days, it very much is. You know, if you want to open an account, then they usually have, like, I don't know, 3+ mechanisms to try to recognize whether you're truly an individual that they haven't seen before. Getting an Apple account without buying an iPhone, if you've ever tried this, it's like trying to run the gauntlet or something. These guys essentially refuse to give you an account. Of course, they advertise that you can get one for free, but I don't know what their AI is saying behind the scenes, but I've tried, I don't know, 10 times to get one. In the end, it's just, I have to buy the iPhone.
So if you want to provide sort of broadband for everybody, or in this case, you know, Polkadot for everyone, there is a need to kind of structure the network based on individuals. But to do that in a way that isn't privacy intrusive, because that would counteract the entire ethos that Polkadot was built upon. That does that in a fair way, of course, and that does that in a kind of Web3 native way to essentially be for the benefit of the entire network, and potentially allow for some people that are kind of reasonably using Polkadot, so aren't writing code or things like that, or whatever the kind of enterprise use case might be. So the users, the citizens, to kind of interact with it in a free kind of manner, but not be able to take the mick as we do as human beings. We're very good at doing that. Not to mention, this solves a lot of problems in the kind of realms of AI and these kind of jurisdictions, you know, with deep fakes and all of this kind of stuff. But this is a very interesting concept, and he goes on to talk about, you know, kind of how this is going to happen and what the benefits. Why do we want to do this? Why are we looking to give some sort of a uniqueness to the cryptocurrency space to be used? And what we're going to do now is dive over into that next clip before we dive into his talk on Jam, sort of reintroducing it and getting people familiar with it once again.
Okay, so why? What's the payoff? Well, you know, discuss some of the ways how society uses or relies, indeed, upon individuality. But how does it translate on chain? Well, we can start imagining Polkadot where reasonable usage is free. No transaction fees, right? If we imagine a plaza, if you're not familiar, this is basically Asset Hub ++, Asset Hub with smart contract functionality and ability to utilize the staking system. If we imagine Plaza, we could, with this kind of infrastructure, we could imagine a plaza where you don't need to pay for gas. Gas is free as long as you're in reasonable usage. Of course, if you're writing scripts, doing lots of transactions, you would need to pay, because you wouldn't fit all under a single person's sort of usage rights. But we can imagine these systems starting to be free for people to use. We can imagine purpose and airdrops, really efficient community bootstrapping. We can imagine much more progressive ways of managing Polkadot's governance. Now, I'm not especially convinced on the one person, one vote mantra. I think it's necessary under some situations for legitimacy, but it doesn't necessarily give especially great outcomes in general. But we might look into things like quadratic voting. We might look into things like territory voting. And for certain elements of representation, one person, one vote can be very illuminating. We could imagine an oracle system not entirely unlike a jury, a real-world jury, where parachains and smart contracts could say, well, we have our sort of local, lesser staked oracleization system, maybe doing price feeds, maybe doing stuff like when users get upset at other users, there's some sort of dispute, maybe resolving disputes. But then they could also say, well, we will also utilize if necessary, a kind of grand jury, right? A kind of supreme court, which is convened from known random individuals to make decisions, who would get some sort of, presumably, little payment for their help in resolving such a dispute. And we would, because it's drawn from a large set of unbiased, we would broadly presume individuals, we would expect it to be a resilient, reliable way of resolving such disputes. Can you imagine noise limitation systems, particularly social media integration, decentralized social media integration, which could help manage spamming and bad behavior? And we can imagine in DeFi, perhaps, reputation confinement systems, not entirely unsimilar to some sort of, credit score, but perhaps more with a have you been sort of caught not paying things back score.
Back to the kind of point that I made at the start of the video about Gavin Wood being particularly good at talking about topics on a really high level. What this is all about, it's all about doing the same thing that allows the internet to be used by so many people, and that is to giving some sort of an individuality to people so that people don't take the mick. And once you can do that, and it needs to be in the true Web3 ethos, in a decentralized, censorship-resistant, privacy-adhering, data ownership, kind of fashion, you give these people pseudonyms, if you will, that we kind of know, that kind of rolling up identities, if you will, kind of using like ZK knowledges for this. Then what you can do is you can actually start to roll out things like free transaction fees and free smart contract interaction, which essentially allows Polkadot to be used by everyone. And this, I think, is truly brilliant. This is a very high-level topic to cover on blockchain, because it absolutely amazes me just how far this space has came. When people think about crypto, they think about Bitcoin, but we're building entire sort of systems here, and Polkadot is really at the helm of that. And I think an interesting or an exciting thing to now move on to is, of course, Jam, which we'll get into, which is the next part of Gavin Wood's speech, and then we'll wrap the video up there. But there's a lot going on. We're seeing these sort of parachain slot auction model get taken away, and it's going to be very exciting for me and important for me to keep covering Polkadot when that kind of barrier is taken down, because ultimately I think we're going to see just an onslaught of individuals come into the Polkadot space, and not only that, then leverage the other kind of what are parachains at the moment, partnerships, to kind of really build this like juggernaut where Polkadot literally has everything. So let's move on to the last bit of Gavin's speech in regards to Jam and his introduction to it, and then we'll wrap the video up.
Jam takes Polkadot, utilizes a lot of Polkadot's technology in order to deliver what Ethereum folks would say is a roll-up host chain together with a roll-up reactor. Actually call it a cynical roll-up, a new type of roll-up, not an optimistic roll-up, not a ZK roll-up, but a cynical roll-up. And it is, if you want to read more about what I mean by cynical roll-ups, there's a look at the top right QR code. One of the key advantages with Jam over Polkadot, and indeed other proposed scalable systems, is that it does not persistently shard state. State is retained on-chain, small amount, but also in a secure, decentralized data availability system. Indeed, a lot of data is retained in there, 1.6 petabytes by our estimations. Now, this isn't as coherent as data that remains in the core, in the middle of the chain, but it's still mostly coherent. And what does this mean? Well, it means that we've found a way to scale without breaking resilience and without giving up too much coherency. And one of the issues on Polkadot is coherency. A smart contract in one parachain, as a smart contract in one parachain, it's not so easy to compose one's utility with a smart contract in some other parachain. The interoperability is there via XCM, but it's inconvenient. And this inconvenience restricts, practically speaking, the levels of composability and of composable utilities that can be produced. Jam eases this constraint substantially. And as it happens, by moving from WebAssembly to a new technology, PokerVM, it's also able to offer substantially increased performance. And there are a few other tricks that we do to get this substantially increased performance. But with the increased performance, we're able to, or we project, all right, so treat this number with a pinch of salt, but we project around 1 trillion EVM gas a second throughput. Now, it's EVM equivalent. And a lot of this throughput is in large part because EVM is very inefficient when it's mapped onto real-world hardware, whereas PVM is eminently able to be mapped to real-world hardware. Jam is permissionless and unsequenced, much in the same way as the Polkadot relay chain. It doesn't care about what order parachain transactions arrive in. It's up to the parachain collators for that. And Jam is parachains compatible. It's Polkadot 1 compatible. I think they're calling it Polkadot 2 now, so Polkadot 2 compatible. And it's Ethereum bridged in much the same way as Polkadot is today.
Huge. Did you hear that? 1 trillion ETH gas per second, which would be efficient enough to allow people free transactions, to allow the citizens who are individual and individualized and represented on the blockchain to essentially use and transact. And that is going to make Polkadot a pretty obvious choice, because what that's going to say to people is that, okay, you've got all these other blockchains out here that for our users to use, they've got to pay, essentially. Whereas Polkadot would say, no, that's not the case. You just need to basically create an account and you can use it just like you can use the internet. That's it from me, ladies and gentlemen. On that note, I'm going to love and leave you. Fantastic speech from Gavin Wood. As always, somebody who I am going to make it my work to try and get on the show in one way, shape or form, in person or over the web. I'm sure that's something we can make happen at some point, or I'm certainly hopeful. On that note, I'm going to love and leave you guys. Thanks a lot for watching. Have a fantastic Friday, and I will see you all in the next one.